Hey everyone, welcome to the Crazy Amazing Humans podcast, where we highlight everyday humans doing crazy, amazing things. I'm Katrina Carlson.
And I'm Jefferson Denham.
And today's guest is the Right Honourable Kim Campbell. And you're like, what's that? Kim was the 19th Prime Minister of Canada and so much more, right?
Right. Well, she was the first female Prime Minister and, dare I say, the only female Prime Minister.
To date, there's no one else who's been elected there. And our conversation is really a fascinating look into all the spheres of influence that someone can have, and how, honestly, I think we can help everyone through listening to this kind of utilize their talents and experiences to become a leader for good for themselves. But boy, when we tell everyone what she's done, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, I'll tell you a couple of takeaways for me, which was really profound. So here's someone who's worked in the arena of politics, and you studied politics in college, but just to navigate that, I mean, all of the potential pitfalls.
For sure. I always thought I would go into public office. That's something I wanted to do. I really followed my heart into music and songwriting and all of that, and singing. So that just took me that direction. It was really cool to see someone who, especially, for how long she did that, and at the era that she did it, because she was Prime Minister in 1993. That's when, and I'm telling you, I grew up in the 80s, so I know how, it was not always such a great environment. We have a lot better environment today, but it's got a lot of work to do.
She also talked a lot about evolution of thinking. Remember when she said in 72, she may not have had the same kind of passions.
For like the Title IX situation.
Yeah. And so then as she just kept an open mind, which was part of her motto, right? Learning and discovering. And she was able to kind of evolve by letting in other thoughts, other people into outside of the bubble.
What she's done for women and how she speaks out for the environment and all of these things that, we kind of all want to prop up. And what I loved was that she said, so many men want to help women, and so many men helped me to get to where I am today. And you interjected a little bit about that, men who have daughters like you and Ken, and you understand, like, I think we all get it.
It's funny too, she said, and I totally agree. For Ken and for myself, when you have a daughter, you want to give them the sky's the limit kind of message. And so if I think a lot more men maybe are willing to vocalize that opinion. And you're right, this is my own personal perspective. It's on us, if we have a bit of an advantage, if men have a built-in advantage, to share and to make sure that other people are lifted up as well.
Yeah, and I am seeing that a lot. And then we're seeing other things that aren't so much like that in this day and age. But without further ado, we want to thank everyone for being here with us today. We just are glad you're with us. Kim Campbell has a great life story to tell. So let's just get to it.
We want to thank you for joining us from wherever you are. Like we like to say, we believe it's more important than ever to stay positive, stay active, and stay connected.
Absolutely no truer words, my friend. We want to express how we truly appreciate you, and we want to remind you that you are crazy amazing.
I want you to feel, I want you to feel something crazy, crazy amazing.
Hi, this is Nikki Marr from the TM23 Foundation, and you're listening to the Crazy Amazing Humans podcast. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and on the Crazy Amazing Humans YouTube channel, so you'll be the first to know when a new episode comes out.
Hey everyone, so we're here with the Right Honourable Kim Campbell, whose life has been a life of firsts. From the age of 16, when she became the first female student body president at Prince of Wales Secondary School, to the first female president for her freshman class at University of British Columbia, to holding elected office at all three levels of Canadian government, and then becoming Canada's first and only female prime minister in 1993. Clearly, Kim has spent much of her life breaking barriers for women.
Absolutely. And so speaking of firsts, keeping that theme going, she was the first woman to serve as Canada's Minister of Justice and Minister of National Defence, as well as the first woman to serve as Minister of Defence for a NATO member country. Ms. Campbell served as the Canadian Consul General in Los Angeles.
Which is where I met her.
Right. Taught at the Harvard Kennedy School and became an international leader of leaders as chair of the Council of Women World Leaders, as president of the International Women's Forum, and as secretary general of the Club de Madrid, an organization of former presidents and prime ministers, of which she is a founding member.
That's right. And, I just do nothing with my life.
Oh, my life is a waste.
Okay, so that, and she continued on her trajectory as an academic and a leader, serving as the founding principal of the Peter Lougheed Leadership College at the University of Alberta. And in 2016, Kim was appointed by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to serve as chairperson of the Independent Advisory Board for Supreme Court of Canada Judicial Appointments, a role she has reprised 3 times since, most recently in the spring of 2021.
Kim speaks widely on issues related to leadership, international politics, democratization, climate change, gender, and Canadian-American relations, addressing audiences all around the globe. I mean, there's so much more, but let's get to our crazy, amazing guest, the Right Honourable Kim Campbell.
Woo! Welcome to the Crazy Amazing Humans podcast, Kim. You get to talk now.
Oh, thank you. One of the problems of getting older is that your life gets so long that the introductions are longer than the speech or longer than the conversation. But it's lovely to be here.
We're so happy to have you. We're so honored to have you with us today, Kim. You and I are friends for a while now, from so many things, and also
frankly, you're pretty amazing too. But I just want to say,
hear, hear.
Oh, thank you. Jefferson's great too. Aside from, so we know you're crazy amazing. It's kind of astronomical. And that's just another reason it's a delight to have you, because you're my friend and you're crazy amazing. And I can't wait for our audience to get to know you. So we'd love to start with your motto as a jumping off point. It's seek wisdom, conquer fear, do justice. What does that mean to you?
Well, first of all, I might just say that why do I have a motto? Because most people don't walk around like with a motto on their phone. But after I was out of public office, the Governor General of Canada decided that since heraldry had been repatriated to Canada, in decades past, if you wanted to get a coat of arms, you had to go to Holyrood House in Scotland to get one, because that's one of the last links that we have with the United Kingdom, even though we're an independent country. And finally, somebody got around to moving all of that for Canadian people and Canadian organizations to Canada. So the Governor General was very excited and said he'd like to create a coat of arms for everyone who had served as Prime Minister of Canada. And he even created a special insignia that would go on the crest of the coat of arms that would indicate that the person bearing these arms had served as Prime Minister. So that was really pretty wonderful. And it was an interesting exercise to try to depict my life or the things that were important to it with the heraldic figures that you have. So that my supporters are a lion and a bear, and the lion represents my father, the bear represents my mother. My mother liked being a bear on my coat of arms. For all sorts of, and they hold things and they do things and they're symbols. But of course, the final thing once you have a coat of arms is you need a motto. And and I thought a lot about it, and I thought seek wisdom, because learning and always trying to grow is very important to me, and doing justice is important. But I thought for the poetry of it, I needed 3. So I thought, well, what else could I add? And then it just came to me: seek wisdom, conquer fear, do justice. And the reason for this is, first of all, seeking wisdom. It's not just knowledge, but wisdom, because a lot of people are smart and maybe even knowledgeable, but not very wise. Wisdom requires taking the things you learn and putting it in a much broader context, testing it, understanding how this knowledge fits into the whole reality of the world. And can you really rely on the things that you think you know? And in fact, I would think that in the course of my life, the narratives of my life have really changed. I'm a different person because I'm much more open-minded about a lot of things. I've learned about a lot of things. So I seek wisdom. I seek to have in my head an understanding of the world that is fair and informed and can give me sort of a sound basis for making decisions. And And then doing justice at the end was obviously, what do we want to do with it? Like, we want to do justice. But the conquering fear was important, because when you look at some of the things that we're worried about in the world, whether it's, resurgent authoritarianism, or, people who are against democracy, a lot of the bad things that can happen come from people being afraid. But I also spend a lot of my time trying to empower people, particularly women, to go out and do things, and trying to get them not to be afraid, because there are a lot of ways that we learn in our life, lessons that say, oh, you can't do that, or you shouldn't do that, or you don't belong there. So conquering fear, the fear in ourselves about our own ability, but also fear in society, not allowing people's fear of the unknown or fear of things that they don't understand to lead them down paths that wind up being destructive, unfair, unjust, and not very helpful. So, for example, something like climate change. I mean, it's a terrible thing, but and we should be afraid of it. Sometimes, fear is an intelligent response to something, but overcoming that so that you can act. So conquering fear, not never being afraid, but conquering it so it doesn't paralyze you and keep you from doing whatever you think needs to be done to address the things that are frightening you. So those were sort of fundamental values that I thought were important. And they've kind of, for me, stood the test of time. I'm not sorry that I chose them. I think that's a good motto. And sometimes when I'm talking to young people at a commencement or something, I'll say, one of the things that's interesting is, think about your own motto. What would you, if you had to make a motto, what might it be? What are the things that are important to you, and what things you might want to live by? Write it down somewhere. I mean, I didn't get to do it till I was, getting quite elderly and had the chance to have a coat of arms. But, maybe if 40 years earlier I had a chance to have a motto, who knows what it might have done for me, clarifying my thinking.
I'm definitely going to make sure I have a motto, and all our kids. Yeah.
I was going to say, I'm not going to steal your coat of arms, but I might steal your motto.
Well, I don't think there's no copyright in mottos, like there's no copyright in titles. In my view, is that there are some ways in which, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and, me motto, you motto,
All right. In fact, I'm thinking of getting this as a tattoo. Don't tell my wife. But so you alluded to a couple of things. So we want to unpack, one of which is we know you have a passion for the advancement of women leadership. That's an important theme in your life. You've lived it out and you're championing it for others. How important is that to help women reach their full potential?
Well, it's important to help women reach their full potential because it's important for society. We might like to believe, when I grew up, people used to say things like, oh, beauty and brains don't come in the same package. And then I met all these, amazingly brilliant women who also happened to be extremely attractive. And I thought, well, that's really stupid. I mean, one has nothing to do with the other. But the point is that the repository of intelligence and wisdom and knowledge and capacity to improve life among human beings does not exist only in one sex. It's not just men who have it. Women do too. And when women do not have an opportunity to develop, and I believe men need to have the opportunity to develop their capacities too. It's just a society puts up fewer barriers to them because society expects them to be ambitious. It expects them to be leaders. They don't have the same feeling that they don't belong when they aspire to greatness and accomplishment. But with very, very often women, there are stereotypes that are just simply unfounded. Now, if they were true, if we really were the weaker sex and poor little darlings and you couldn't expect much of us, I'd say don't sweat it. But the fact is it's not true. And one of the really interesting things is the increasing interest in a lot of people in recovering the narratives of women who have done amazing things, but who never got credit for them or who got forgotten. And the New York Times created a new feature in its obituary column a few years ago, where they go back and they write about people who should have had obituaries in the New York Times, but who didn't. And a lot of them are women. Not all of them are women. Some of them are men who did amazingly wonderful things, and you didn't hear about them. And then you read about what they did, and you say, that's so inspiring and so wonderful. But many of them are women who've done things. And because people say, oh, well, we don't really expect women to do that, or a woman who's accomplished is an anomaly. We don't have to pay attention to her. We mustn't let her disrupt our comfortable assumption that men are more accomplished than women and that we don't need to expect women to do things to get an obit in the New York Times, aside from dying. but that narrative of who women are and what they do is really, really important to know, because the stories are astonishing. And, and it's very nice when people talk about things that I've done and you call me crazy and amazing. But, I'm nothing compared to many women. I mean, there are women who are leaping tall buildings in single bounds all over the place, as scientists and doctors. And the woman who rode, across the Atlantic by herself. Oh, poor thing, these women, they're such dainty little things, when they are the weaker sex. They run across the ready Atlantic Ocean, how many people have. So I think that that's what's really important to me, is that there is all of this talent and capacity and strength. And I'm selfish. I want all of it to be developed. I want all of it to be recognized. I want access to all of these accomplishments because I want the best world possible. And if you tell me that I can't benefit by the things that women would contribute, then it's like saying, well, excuse me, I'm just going to cut your leg off because you really only need one to walk on. You can get a little crutch here. I'm saying, well, how can the world function like that? And the fact that women are socially sometimes disempowered or marginalized means that often women see things differently. And in terms of the fact that they're still the only people who actually give birth, they have certain experiences that are unique to them, which means they sometimes ask different questions. The reality of the world as women live it is, as I used to say when I was a minister, there's nothing radical or subversive about the notion that the reality of life as women live it should be one of the premises on which we make public policy, because women often will have different perspectives and ask different questions. And lo and behold, on the basis of pursuing their questions, we learn new and amazing and wonderful things. So there's nothing wrong with saying that men and women, have different experiences, but those differences vary from society to society and within societies. You can't overgeneralize about them. I'll give you an example. When the United States Congress in 1972 passed Title IX to require that programs that had federal funding had to be equally available to men and women. This, of course, as we all know, affected sports. And sports that had federal funding and education institutions, they had to provide equal funds for women. And I actually knew Birch Bayh, one of the senators who supported this legislation. And I remember saying to him, I'm not sure in 1972 that I would have voted for that, because I think in 1972, I might have thought that actually men were more interested in sports than women were. But then all of a sudden, an amazing thing happened. When there was funding available for women's athletics, all of a sudden, out of the woodwork came all these women who said, oh, yay, finally I can play sports. They wanted to play, but there was no funding for teams, so they didn't play. So they didn't have that opportunity. And we've seen a revolution in women's athletics. And with that has come, the fact that now we've got the women's national soccer team in the United States, and they've got stars and people, admire them, and will the Canadians beat them at the World Cup? I hope so, but you never know. But the point is all these new stars, but also a different sense of what a beautiful female body is. A beautiful female body, the archetype is no longer somebody who's sort of weak and, fainting and always wearing high heels, so they have to be looked after. Beautiful women take a lot of different forms, and some of them they're strong and dynamic and play wonderful sports. So one of the things I learned from that, and that was a good lesson for me, because although I've always prided myself on being a feminist, in 1972 I might not have supported Title IX. I wasn't in the American Congress, so you were spared my ignorance. But the point is, what it taught me was you can never judge what people can do by what they are doing, because what they are doing is what they're allowed to do, what there's room for them to do. And sometimes you don't even see the barriers, like lack of funding for a team. But when you take away those barriers, when you stop discriminating, when people audition behind a screen for a symphony orchestra and they start to hire way more women, when you take those barriers away, you discover what people really want to do and what they can do. You're not judging the limited constraints of our society as being some kind of reality. No, that's just today. Take those barriers away and you will be amazed. And think of how many men and maybe in your own family, who love watching their daughters playing soccer and who are so proud of their daughters who play these wonderful sports. And all the years that women were saying, well, we can't have women in the corporate world because, the one thing that women don't do, they don't play on teams. So they don't really have the same culture that men do when they come and they've been playing on into a hello, I'd like you to meet Megan Rapinoe. She plays on a team. I mean, there's all these women who now suddenly are doing the things that people assumed they didn't want to do or couldn't do, but they weren't able to do. But the reason they weren't doing them was because there were no opportunities. And this applies to a lot of people who are marginalized. So again, going back to seeking wisdom, it's, questioning the status quo and saying, is what I'm seeing, is this a reality I can rely upon to do justice at the other end? Or might I unintentionally be complicit in constraints and unjust things because I'm just assuming that what I see is some kind of ultimate reality, whether it is or isn't?
It's sort of like Katrina and I were talking about this. It's like the Roger Bannister factor. If you're trying to break, no one broke the 4-minute mile until he did. And now, we can go there and we can do that. Yeah. Katrina and I are fascinated too about, you've alluded to a little bit about this, like the misconceptions about empowering women. But what I want to ask you, and this is for me and any of our audience who are men, why is empowering women a good thing for all, including men?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people think it is, and a lot of men think it is. It's very wrong to think that men don't support women, that a lot of men do. I'll just give you a little story. I chaired a foundation in Kiev a number of years ago. And in the early days of independent Ukraine, it was pretty corrupt. But Canada has one of the largest Ukrainian diasporas of any country in the world except for Russia. So when Ukraine became independent, all sorts of Canadians rushed over to do business there and help them and invest or whatever. But they discovered it wasn't their grandparents' Ukraine, and they all got fleeced. And I remember going there, meeting a group of Canadians who were doing business in Kiev. And one of the men said to me, I will only do business with companies run by women. He said, they're honest, they're smart, they do what they say. Because of all the things, the aspects of the culture that supported playing fast and loose, these were the kinds of things that men were learning. And it was part of the kind of the toxic masculinity that often underlies corrupt societies. And it was just very interesting, this man, and I've met a lot of men who say, we'll be better off when women are running things, because they are disillusioned with what men have been doing. And they're disillusioned with what they see are aspects of so-called masculine culture, which bring out the worst in men, not the best. And you see, I don't think women are better than men or men are better than women. I think members of both sexes have the capacity to be absolutely wicked and villains, and to be wonderful and creative and smart and humane, etc. But if you create a society where men feel entitled and privileged and never have to question that, and assume that they should go to the front of the line, that's a recipe for disaster. But a lot of men get it. I would not have become Prime Minister of Canada if I wasn't a member of a party where a lot of my caucus colleagues wanted me to be leader. And I remember one of them who was 180 degrees from me on issues. He was much more conservative than I was. And when somebody said, well, why are you supporting him? Because she's tough, but she's fair. And it was trust, that they knew that I would listen, that I would never exclude them, that I would do my best to lead in a way where they could feel, an important part of the team. And that just came from their experience of working with me in my different cabinet portfolios. But and not every woman is brilliant, wonderful, and women can succumb to the same kind of temptations that men do that bring out the worst in them. But I think that what's so important is to create a society where we allow women and men to shine, and where men don't feel that it's a zero-sum game, that if a woman is doing something well, that it takes something away from them. It doesn't. And that's why, as I say, I think it's so great that so many men are so proud of their daughters. They recognize that it's just so great to see. And often they become aware of discrimination when somebody, shuts their daughter out. They go, wait a minute, that's my daughter.
Ken and I can probably say yes to that.
Yeah.
It's great. And so I'm sure you've come up against just everything as you have come up in the world, getting elected to all of these offices, being in politics for so long there in Canada, interacting internationally all the time. And there was a campaign recently that we saw that I thought was kind of interesting. And I think you got some friction here too. You were one of the founders of the Sing All of Us campaign. Right. Do you want to explain that, what it was?
Well, there is a line in the Canadian national anthem. It starts, "O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, in all thy sons command." Now, incidentally, all that line was not original to the anthem. It was actually brought in around the time of World War I. And I think the idea was to create a lot of oomph to get people to sign up to go to the war. It wasn't original. The original line was, "True patriot love, in us thou dost command." So in Canada, you inspire, you command true patriot love in us. But in the late 20th century, 21st century, singing "in us thou dost command," that's not going to go anywhere. So some of us thought, well, let's get rid of that revision from World War I and go back to the original idea and saying "true patriot love, in all of us command." So it's a little bit changed, because instead of saying you do inspire this love in us, but just saying to inspire true patriot love, in all of us command. So, and all of us includes everybody. And it's interesting because my husband comes from an immigrant family. He was born in Canada, but he said that he often felt that "in all thy sons command" kind of maybe shut out immigrants, or that people, who hadn't been there for a long time. And who knows? I mean, that's why, and again, I wouldn't see that because I come from Scottish heritage. 3 of my grandparents were born in Scotland, but on the 4th side, I'm 8th generation Canadian. So, I don't feel that I any concern about belonging. But, and again, you listen to other people and you go, oh, other people have different experience. Maybe I need to think about it. But if you say, "Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, in all of us command," how inclusive and embracing is that? "With glowing hearts, we see thee rise, the true north strong." And this is all about we. It's about us stand on guard, "O Canada, we stand on guard for thee." It's like, it's the most embracing, familial, wonderful thing. And you would think that we were, revising the Bible to have the 9 commandments, like who are these people? And yet historically, the "all of us" command was much more close to the original. But, and people say, well, "all thy sons," that includes everybody. And I say, oh, really? It includes everybody. And when was the last time you introduced your daughter as your son?
Inclusivity, I think, is a big pattern in your life, and also with Crazy Amazing Humans, right, Kat?
Yes.
So our community is all about making the world a better place, which you're describing you are doing. What are some of in addition to what you've already shared, what are some of the most impactful initiatives with which you've been involved that have helped others and have made or are making a difference for good?
Well, I sometimes I sometimes describe things as putting a tile in the mosaic of progress. In other words, very few people get a chance to really change the world. Some people do. Some people find that history puts them in a position where their actions have outsized impact. But when we created the Club of Madrid, this organization of former democratically elected presidents and prime ministers, I remember saying then, we have no illusions about our power. We don't have power. Although sometimes there's a certain power in powerlessness, because we can say what we want. We're not confined by the things that would have confined us when we were in office and had to think of a whole lot of other things before we shut our mouths off. But I think that the important thing is to understand that we won't necessarily change the world, but if we don't try to do something, little things can add up. And sometimes when you see, for example, I have the Order of Canada, and when I went to the ceremony, and of course all the other people are being honored, and every one of us there is thinking, what am I doing here? Because you see all these people and the wonderful things they do, and they may be a small thing in their community, but you see, how did they think to do that? And they made a big difference in people's lives. So I'm just saying that I don't have any illusions, but I've had some marvelous opportunities. And one of them was when I was the first woman to be Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. And I wanted to honor that. And in Canada, the criminal law is a federal jurisdiction. So we have one criminal code for the whole country. And the Minister of Justice is a very important person because it's the Minister of Justice who leads the legislative initiatives for the criminal law. And it's a big deal. And actually, it is a big deal because there are two areas of legislation where the power of the state is arrayed against people. One is taxation. You don't pay your taxes, you can get carted off. But the other is the criminal law, where you're defining activities that can engender criminal penalties, imprisonment, serious fines. We don't have capital punishment in Canada, seriously. So when I became Minister of Justice, it was a big deal, and people were very excited. Men and women were very excited, and I thought I wanted to honor it. So I actually convened a symposium in Vancouver on women, law, and the administration of justice. And I had wonderful lawyers in my department who helped create the agenda. We went out and talked to people around the country, stakeholders, to say, well, if you could have such a meeting, what would you want to talk about? They came up with a lot of things that I hadn't thought about. Again, I had a fairly privileged life, and there are many things, ways in which the law didn't serve women that weren't necessarily familiar to me. So we brought this together, and it was a very generative conference because it engendered a whole lot of ideas for legislation. And we had a number of judges who came, because if a minister convenes it, they know that their independence will be protected, that they won't be embarrassed in any way. And a couple of them said, words to the effect of, before I came here, I thought I was pretty liberal on these issues, and I realized I didn't know anything. And then when I followed through on a lot of things, I brought for significant legislative initiatives in gun control, sexual assault. I revised the sexual assault legislation, gay rights, bringing amendments to make sexual orientation a prohibited ground of discrimination in the Canadian Human Rights Act, a whole lot of things. And they were difficult issues and divisive even among my own colleagues. And when I got legislation through, it was interesting that the press often were totally perplexed of how I could do this, because I didn't go and say, I'm going to make this happen and, get out of my way. I just carefully worked with people to get support so that I could, get my bills through Parliament. And I think that had a lot to do with, why I eventually became leader, is people, they liked the way I operated. I wasn't stealthy. I just worked at things and tried to be inclusive and listen to people. And some people knew they weren't going to win the argument, but I never disdained them or treated them any differently. And it was very interesting because after I was out of office, a few years later, another woman was Minister of Justice. And this may have been said to other ministers besides women, but she just happened to be the second woman in the portfolio, and we became friends in Edmonton. And she said to me that when she became Minister of Justice and she was being briefed on all the things in the department, they said, and would you like to follow the Campbell mode of consultation? And she said, and what is that? And they said, well, Minister Campbell used to like to consult quite a bit more broadly than the usual suspects. I mean, when you're doing legislation, you got the Canadian Bar Association and the, women in the law, all sorts of different groups. But I used to go out, and for example, when we were dealing with sexual assault, we went out, I remember going to Toronto, a meeting with organizations representing women of color who would say to you that, police would make assumptions that somehow domestic violence was natural to their communities, that, which it wasn't at all, and, didn't try to protect them. So when you go and you talk to people, or lesbian women who would say, if we're in a gay bar and we come out, and there are men who think they will cure us of our sexual orientation by raping us, that's all you need. And you think, so, but see, how would I know about that? That's not a reality of my life. So when I was trying to craft laws that would not leave something out, that would not forget things that we had to do. So my sexual assault law came to be known as the No Means No law. And it was a very good piece of legislation, but it was informed by a very broad array of consultation and understanding who would be affected by the new norms in the law. And so I think, if you ask me, where do I feel that I made a difference? I think that in those years of drafting that legislation and creating, first of all, a model of legislating that, and it was interesting because the other, the lawyers who worked in the Department of Justice came to be quite proud of what we accomplished. And, they supported it. And at first they thought, well, maybe the minister doesn't trust us our advice because she wants to go beyond. I said, no, you guys are wonderful. The work you do is spectacular. You give me terrific advice, but we don't know everything and we don't experience everything. So it's not an insult to you that I now want to go out and meet with other people. It's because I understand that there's just, if there's 50 of you working on this file, that's 50 in a population of over 30 million people. So, but creating that different culture, having them understand that this was something that they should embrace, that this would actually make the legislation better, help it to withstand criticism, because you would have anticipated all the things that people could use against it. And also, when you consult with a lot of people, they don't always win the argument. And sometimes I remember somebody saying, oh, with it, we should get rid of the presumption of innocence in cases of sexual assault. And I'm going, my hair is curling. I don't think we're ready to get rid of the presumption of innocence quite yet. But people who have consulted with, even if they don't win the argument, they know they were heard. They were part of the conversation, and maybe they didn't win the argument, but they were part of the process. And that's so important for how people feel about the law.
Absolutely. And you talk about the law and policy. Now we live in this world where there's a lot of polarization, and we're just curious your perspective on how to help bridge the political divides that exist in the US and all over the world. Do you have any wisdom?
The question you're asking is a deeply, deeply important one. And part of the problem with the polarization is the way that communication, that media, and the way people talk to each other has become polarized, that people are living in their own little bubbles. And it becomes very difficult as people are convinced of different narratives and different realities. And the best way is to try and find ways of bringing people together, and maybe not necessarily around the issues that most divide them. But maybe, for example, in Ireland, during the Troubles, I mean, one of the ways that women incidentally helped to create the basis for the peace that came with the Good Friday agreements was they started working across the divides on issues relating to children, school children, and school uniforms. And they found areas where, as mothers, they had similar concerns, whether they were Protestant or Catholic. And they could start to have conversations. And in having those conversations where they tried to work together to deal with issues that they all had, with their kids in schools, they began to see each other as humans. They began to see the humanity in each person. And it became harder to stereotype and harder to harden themselves against someone that they realize is a person just like them. And that's not easy to do. It's not easy to do. And there's a lot of, hate propaganda and hate speech out there. And social media has made it worse, and people trolling and saying terrible things to one another. Well, I think the important thing is to experience and to listen to other narratives and get to know people. The expression woke really annoys me, because it seems to me it's a way of attacking people who are prepared to look beyond their own lives, who are prepared to look at the realities, are prepared to understand the injustices. And so, you're also woke. I guess it came from the idea of being awakened to, new realities. But, what a way to undermine progress. What a way to keep the old, structures in place by making, a nasty epithet for people who, in fact, are trying to learn about more than just their own reality. And I think, the interesting thing about the United States is that it's such a huge country. And I can look at people there who just make me despair. But I also look at people who are really forces for good, people, some of the wisest people who ever participated in governance and the development of the law were Americans. And many of them were immigrants. Many of them were, Americans of long-standing, whose ancestors were among the earliest immigrants before they came and drove the Indians off their land. But I mean, the point is that, I don't despair about America as a collection of people, but I worry very much that sometimes countries that have very free institutions are vulnerable for people to use that freedom to destroy the freedom of others.
Yeah. Speaking of people with passion, I wanted to kind of shift over to another crazy, amazing human, Sven Lindblad, who you're acquainted with. And you were a guest speaker on a couple of their expeditions, which focused primarily on conservation and climate advocacy. Can you tell us a little bit about your perspectives and the initiatives that you feel are making headway in that arena of climate change?
I despair when I see that there are people, who still, refuse to acknowledge what's happening to our world. And I think history will, assuming that we survive and have a history, will treat them very badly. I am very reassured by people more and more starting now to use the law. I always thought it would come down to money and liability. And we know that oil company executives knew what was happening. They knew what the effect of burning fossil fuel was. Their own scientists told them. It wasn't something that they didn't know. But there were many people who have obfuscated the research, tried to make it seem uncertain, gotten in the way of policymakers making good decisions. And it's really been a disaster. And I think what Sven Lindblad has done is that he has created a formula that maximizes the ability of people to learn. Because when you're on those ships, you have wonderful naturalists who are so knowledgeable. And when they give their presentations, they're so knowledgeable. And incidentally, all of them are also expert photographers. So even though they have a National Geographic photographer, all of the naturalists can train people about taking pictures. And even if you're just using an iPhone or something, they don't disdain anything. They'll teach you how to take better pictures. And what's good about that is that as people take records of what they're seeing, that stays with them. And it's that firsthand getting out there, seeing there, going ashore in the Canadian North and walking along these rocky shores and, seeing the muskox poop and, all the things that like, wow, where are we here? This is amazing. But also, and seeing the polar bears and then being able to connect that with what is actually happening to that part of the world. The idea is to create a love affair with nature and the world between his passengers and where they are, and to surround people with people who are knowledgeable and excited. And where you might not see something, they can tell you what you're looking at. And so then if you understand how these realities might be threatened by changes that we're all contributing to making on the earth, maybe that can begin to get at people's hearts in a way that is often an important road to get to their minds, when their hearts begin to respond to that reality.
What are your thoughts on what we can do personally? Because there's a lot of human beings on the planet who are interested in what's going on around them. We all live busy lives. What's like one, maybe two things that we can do personally to help our planet?
Well, there's all sorts of different skills. I mean, one of the things you can do is just support a good media outlets that you think are doing a good job of telling the story. I mean, very often they're struggling for financial support, write them a check and encourage people to read them, encourage people to listen to them. I think obviously on a personal level, trying to live our own lives in a way that, reduces our carbon footprint and try to help people be aware of what they can do. But I think also the important thing is putting pressure on policymakers to do what needs to be done. And the tragedy is that there have been many people in public life who have wanted to make the right decisions. But when you have the oil industries and actually the electric utilities in the United States too, funding organizations that pretend to be scientific, they have these, spurious names, and whose purpose is not to tell you that the science of climate change is wrong. They're not that stupid, but to tell you that it's uncertain. And uncertainty is the worst thing for a politician, because you want to do something. You want to ask people to do something differently, to give, to financially support things, to change the way they live. If they're not convinced that it's really necessary, you can't do it. And even things like carbon taxes, which is one of the most sensible ways of, leveraging the market model because what markets are really good at is allocating resources. And if the markets are not distorted, and people with their thumb on the scale and subsidies and all sorts of things that distort the market, but a free working market is often extremely efficient in allocating resources because people will put their money where the return is. So if you distort that, it's very difficult. So I think trying to help democratic politicians do the right thing, and incidentally, there's a lot that can be done at the local government level too. I started my political career at the local government level, and I often, when I go to talk in countries that are just creating democracies and they all want to go and be their national assembly, and I think that's great, that's important. but don't overlook the importance of local government. First of all, that's often where people develop their sense of whether democracy responds to them or not. I mean, if the potholes never get filled and everything is going to hell in a handbasket, then they're pretty jaded about it. But there are a lot of things that communities are doing at the local level to deal with climate change. I think I saw that Ithaca, New York, was now committed to be absolutely carbon neutral by 2030. And this is so, but at that scale, often people can collaborate and communicate. And it may, if you go back to the conversation that Katrina started about how do we break down polarization, maybe finding ways of cooperating at the local level and reaching out to people, that you might not normally engage with, and working on those issues may help to break down some of the mistrust that people feel. Nothing is a magic wand because the divisions are very deep. But I think that there are a lot of things, and even, I've become very interested in the whole idea of biochar, because where I live, we have a lot of, trimmings from our olive trees and things. And biochar is a way of burning things at very high temperature without oxygen. And it produces a very interesting kind of carbon that is very stable. And you can use it in building materials. You can put it in the soil. It really enriches the soil. But the carbon is stable, like for 1,000 years. It's not like sequestering carbon dioxide in effluent where it could still escape as a gas. This is an actual way of creating. And I think I actually want to talk to people in my area here about finding ways of enabling us to create more opportunities to get rid of our agricultural waste by creating biochar, because it actually creates this very useful substance. And that, how can you actually take carbon out of the atmosphere? Carbon dioxide, very difficult. The only machine we have that does it is a tree. But if you could grow things that were quick growing and then burn them to make biochar and then plant new things there, you could actually have a cycle where you are taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
Yeah, it's sort of like you have to pay attention what's happening. You can do your composting. A lot of things are provided by the city here where we live in Santa Monica, where if you just do what they're really trying to help you to do, you can make a big difference. That's a really good point, Kim. I love that. And
but I think it also makes people feel empowered. And
absolutely.
That's from despairing, because otherwise it's easy to despair.
There is so much going on in this world today, and we always want to give our audience hope, because there is hope in the world. So that's a big point of where there is hope with the things we can do for the environment ourselves.
I was struck last year. I came upon John Keats's poem Endymion, and we all studied it in high school English and university English. And you studied all this stuff in English, and you sort of thought, well, this is all very interesting, but what good is it for me? And then you get older and you realize, the reason why we studied that is because the ideas there are really profound and really helpful. And Endymion is the poem that starts, "A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness, but will keep a bower for you," blah, blah, blah. And it's a very long poem. He's writing about what could be taken. He's writing in the early 19th century about when you're in a situation where terrible things are happening and there are terrible people around, and that beauty can help to give you resilience. It doesn't make the bad things go away, but how do you deal with that? And if you balance your life between the things that worry and frighten you and disgust you, etc., and beauty, whether it's visual beauty or landscape beauty or music beauty, then you need that to have resilience. And then going back again to the idea of a college education, the more people can be exposed to the resources of culture and understand that this is what this does for you. First of all, kids study music, their brains develop better and they do better on tests and all that kind of stuff. It's not a thrill, it's actually important. But that for us as human beings, we're living through difficult times, and we need to gird our loins with the resources that will enable us not to despair. And sometimes art and beauty. Where I live is very beautiful, and sometimes I just look out and it's beautiful and it feeds my soul. So I think that that's something else we need to remember. And all of you who with your art and your music, you contribute to this. It's part of, say to somebody, what are you doing? Well, I'm making music, but what I'm really doing is I'm strengthening and empowering all the people who hear it to be able to withstand the bad things in the world by giving them something joyful to have in their heart and their soul.
Resilience. Plus, you're saying education, you step outside of your bubble, and you may or may not get to travel the world, but in your imagination, you get to be empathetic to other experiences through arts, right? So we've covered so many great things here, Kim. I just wanted to ask, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure our audience knows?
I often talk to audiences of young people, and particularly when I was in Edmonton running the Peter Lougheed Leadership College. And sometimes people would say, what's the most important thing in leadership? And I would say to young people, the most valuable currency you will ever spend is respect. And if you can learn to respect people and treat them with respect, you will be amazed at how far you get. Because one of the things that often leads to people being angry and violent, whatever, as Rodney Dangerfield, you say, I don't get no respect. But actually feeling you don't get no respect can be, a terrible trigger. It makes people feel weak and disempowered and frightened. So remember that if there's an opportunity to show somebody respect, a little bit of time to listen and a respect for their position and their humanity, that can be part of vocabulary that helps to break down the polarization. And the other side of that coin is, I think, that one of the most important virtues is kindness. And again, being kind to people, thinking about them, how they feel. And I think that so much of what we're seeing as polarization is a kind of, it's not even a dialogue, it's a kind of a confrontation that's lacking respect and lacking kindness, where people forget that there's flesh and blood human beings on the other side of that exchange, and that they're not there for your entertainment to troll them and lie about them and, all those kinds of things. So I would just say that I think if we have a sense of our own virtues, and for me, my motto helps, but I think there are a lot of ways every day that we can decide that these are the values I want to live by. And some people make it difficult for you, and some people are pretty ornery and pretty, you want to kick them in the proverbials, but mostly, if you can find that way. I just don't want anybody.
You're not running for office right now, are you?
No, but you don't have to be saintly. To be kind, to be respectful, doesn't mean you have to be a doormat, and it doesn't mean you have to be oblivious. It means you have to say the only way out of this is to find some common ground. And it might not be easy, but at least I won't make it worse. And if I can make it a teensy bit better, I will have put a tile in the mosaic of progress. Remember, we all want to be a tile in them, because when you see a mosaic and it's missing a tile, you go, oh, it doesn't look right.
We're just so grateful, your beautiful title of the Right and Honourable Kim Campbell. We thank you so much for being with us here on the Crazy Amazing Humans podcast. You are crazy amazing.
I want you to feel, I want you to feel something crazy, crazy amazing.
There you have it. That's our show for today. We want to thank the Right Honourable Kim Campbell for joining us and sharing her story. And if you've enjoyed today's episode and you think it would be meaningful to someone else, let them know about us.
Right. Remember to make sure and subscribe to the Crazy Amazing Humans podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And we've also filmed the podcasts, so you can check us out on the Crazy Amazing Humans YouTube channel. Oh, and make sure and join the conversation and leave comments. We love to hear what you're thinking.
Definitely let us know. You can write down if you're watching us on YouTube or if you're listening on your favorite podcast platform. Let us know what you think. And most of all, we want to thank you for being here. And we want to remind you that every little kindness has the potential to create crazy, amazing human experience, one person at a time.
And as always, this week, we want to encourage you to find one thing that you can do to extend kindness and love in the world. I'm Jefferson Denham.
And I'm Katrina Carlson. Stay healthy, stay connected, and we'll see you next time right here on the Crazy Amazing Humans podcast.
I want you to feel, I want you to feel something crazy, crazy amazing.
If you have any questions or comments about today's episode, please make sure to write us at crazyamazinghumans@gmail.com.